All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm on behalf of Student Financial Aid and Scholarships and myself. I'm really excited to spend some time with you all talking a little bit more about one of my favorite subjects, Bougie on a budget, or really talking more about financial wellness. My name is Erica Aguiar, and I'm not necessarily part of the financial aid team, but I think sometimes I'm a little bit of an extension of them in some ways. I work here at the university with the Matchin Florida Opportunity Scholars Program and really work closely with our financial aid partners to support them. And through lots of trial and error and lots of student interaction, have learned that while some students have a good idea of financial wellness, some might not. So I'm really excited to spend a little bit of time with you all talking about it in layman's terms in a way that makes sense, in a way that's fun, and sometimes reduces stigma around financial wellness because it can be a really tough topic. But I do find that when I talk about it and say financial wellness, that feels really loaded. So this really is just called Bougie on a Budget. I've also called it How to Live Well in College Without Only Eating Ramen, because I know that tends to be an experience for some people. So it's really exciting to break down some of that and really make sure that we can talk about some of this stuff that feels a little hard, but is actually not that difficult. I do think it's important, right, to take a step back and define what we're talking about today. What is financial wellness? And I want to put it in pretty simple terms. So according to Forbes, financial wellness, put simply, is the ability to have a healthy financial life. It means your debts are payable and you have ample emergency, college, and retirement funds. We'll ignore those last two parts. I don't think that we need to think that far in the future just yet. You're well prepared to handle any financial crisis. Okay, cool. We really put that simply. It means safety, right? It means that you have your needs covered and maybe some of your wants, and that if something comes up, you're good to go. So I think if we define it like that, it feels a little easier to think about. It doesn't feel so like, oh my gosh, I've got all these things and debts, and that's hard. I want to break it down as much as we can and make it easy to digest, easy to remember. I think one of the hardest parts when we talk about financial wellness, we talk about budgeting, is understanding what it really means in the real world, right? When we think about budgeting, it's like, yeah, I need to save because I need money. But there's a really strong reality in the United States that not everyone knows how to budget, and that's okay, and that's why we're here. So just to give you some understanding around that, about 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, according to CNN Money. And that means about 2/3 of all Americans don't have regular savings goals. And wherever you're at in this process, if you feel like today you came in and you have a really strong understanding of budgeting, or maybe you came in and you're like, who is a budget? What is a budget? I'm learning right now. I want you to know that people are all along that, but the sooner you start thinking about this and the sooner you start budgeting, it's going to become a whole lot easier. So starting now is really going to sort of propel you into, when we think about you being an adult for the students in the room, that you'll feel a little more comfortable. And then on the other hand, according to Market Watch, 64% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency. So that is, most people can't cover an emergency without having to borrow money. And that can be borrowing from someone or credit. And for some of you, $1,000 might seem like a lot, and it is. It definitely is a lot of money. If you break that down, though, I one time had to replace all 3 of the tires on my car at once, and that was probably close to $500 right there in one day, just gone. So if I didn't have money saved up, or if I didn't have that ability, that's half my savings right there that most people don't even have. So it's okay if you feel like I don't have that either, because clearly it's the common piece, right? Most people are in these conditions where they don't have all of that prepared. So if you're stressed and you came out to this and you were not really sure and you didn't want to feel embarrassed about it, you have no reason to, because this is the reality for a whole lot of people. And there's 4 areas of wellness when we talk about financial wellness. So there's budgeting, saving for emergencies, debt elimination, and retirement planning. And for the sake of today, those last 2 are just going to go to the wayside. And that does not mean that you shouldn't be thinking about debt elimination or retirement planning. If you're anything like me, those things didn't come until after college. So I want to think about, what can we do now? What are small things that you can think about right now? And that is definitely the budgets and emergency savings. If you ever want to talk about the other 2, would happily connect you to some people, happy to talk about it. but we don't have all day. We're just going to be here for an hour. So I want you to know what you're prepared for. I want to take some time based on this group. There's, a lot of folks, so feel free to use the chat. I wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking about some of these questions. You don't have to think about all of them. I do find that some of them might bring up some tough feelings or some, complicated feelings, and that's okay. Some of them might be really fun to think about. But just spend 5 minutes. I'll be muted. Use the chat if you want, or just jot them down. Think about them yourself. No one has to share if no one wants to. But think about your relationship with money through some of these questions, and maybe it'll prompt something else for you to think about. Because before we actually get into the really specifics of budgeting or whatever, the nitty gritty, as some people would call it, I just want you to think about where you're at. Like, how do you feel about money? Just plain and simple. How does it feel to talk about money? Does it feel scary? Does it feel uncomfortable? Think about that for a few minutes, and then we will share out in the chat if you're comfortable. All right, I want to give a couple more minutes, but I definitely want to share some of the stuff that's been happening in the chat, especially for the reporting. People are talking about stress, which is so true, so true. I wish I could retweet all of these. And, the idea, and this comes up with a lot of people, of it is easier, and I agree, to just not look at some of it, right? The stress of looking at what's accumulated or what you have to do, it just sort of makes it more stressful. But also, there's a lot of money provides opportunities, right? I don't want to ignore that. That if you can save and if you can get to a place where you're financially healthy, that's going to open up some doors that might not have been possible beforehand. And Lana, you said easy to spend and slow to earn. If there was a retweet function on Zoom, I would be doing that, because, swiping at Chipotle, that doesn't feel quite as intense. And then I look at my bank account and suddenly, why do we only get paid every other week or something, But I love, the goals of it. Pay down debt. COVID definitely provided a lot of online shopping opportunities. I know for the staff in the room or the faculty, we started working from home and, buying a desk and buying all these things to make it feel a little more comfortable and easier to work were definitely things that were investments, but we might not have planned those things in our budget. I love this idea. I only go out to eat if I have a coupon that's worth it. Yes, that is definitely a great way to look at that. And I also like that for some of you, the money that you used to spend going out to eat now, maybe goes to some online shopping or food delivery. So one of the questions that I always like to just bring up in this is, thinking about guilt and money. And this is, again, a hard topic to talk about for many people. And, for those of you who might be really stressed about money, maybe money wasn't something you grew up with. I know that I grew up, in a lower SES class, and my family didn't have a lot of money. So I always felt guilty when I did spend something or when I needed something for school, and that translated to college. If I needed something like books, or if all my friends from my floor were going out to eat, and it keeps on in adulthood. I want to make sure that that there shouldn't be guilt with spending money, and there shouldn't be an assumption that if you don't have money, you don't deserve certain things, right? If there's a time that you really want to go out because you've got that great coupon, buying that one dinner is not going to cover rent, right? Now, if you go out to dinner every night, that adds up. But if it's $600 to pay rent and it's $5 for Starbucks, and in that day that really made you feel better, there is some value to that. And I don't want to place any guilt or any negative feelings around money, because that's how we get to a space where people don't want to talk about this stuff and people get really stressed. And Constance, I don't think that's weird at all to be happy to pay bills. It's a nice feeling not nice to see the money go away, but very nice to see one less thing to be paid for, or, one less thing to sort of worry about. And so keep thinking about these. These are great sort of thoughts maybe not when you're really stressed about money, because this can maybe bring up some harder feelings, but to sort of untangle how we feel about this stuff. And this is, exactly what I was just saying. This is really hard. I can't talk to my family about money, for example. My parents get very stressed. There's a lot of shame in talking about money, and people say you should never talk about money. And, I think you have to know what your limits are, what you're comfortable with and not comfortable with, but there should not be any embarrassing feelings around talking about this stuff, because it's tough for almost everyone. And the more we talk about it, the less taboo it feels. So the more you can have comfortable conversations, the more you can be open and be willing to engage on these topics, the better it's going to be. That does not mean that you need to go to every professor and be like, so how much do you make? Right? That's a little different, but this is the space, especially, if you signed up for this, it's by assumption that you're ready to talk about money and, maybe nervous but excited. So this is a good place to unleash some of these feelings that you might be having. But it is hard. I have done this so many times that it feels a little easier for me. And if I can create a space where you feel more comfortable hearing about this stuff or talking about it, then I feel like I've done my job. So the biggest thing that I can reiterate to you is understanding the difference between wants and needs. And this is especially for students. It's not dragging you by any means, but this is something that I find is hard to understand. There are things we want and there are things we definitely need, right? So we want that new Xbox that was selling out at Christmas time. I need you to pay rent, right? You can't play with an Xbox in an apartment that doesn't have electricity, for example. So what are the things that we can save for and what are the things we need in this moment? We want Starbucks, and this is one for me. I want it all the time, but I also need you to have groceries, right? So if you do get that Starbucks, are you also buying coffee for the week at the grocery store? Are you using the Field and Fork pantry? What are those ways that you're still making sure those needs are met before your wants? And then we want the iPhone X Max, X Pro, which I know is not real. I can't keep up with them. But for those of you thinking about the future, you might need that money for medical school applications. And again, none of this means you have to always choose, and we'll talk about the specifics of that, how do we boil down and really make sure we can have space for both. We'll get there. But making sure that those needs are covered first, those essential, I need these to be able to move forward before we start thinking about those things that would be really nice to have, but are just that. They're just nice to have. So hopefully that can be something you sort of keep in your head, especially for people like me who love online shopping. Do I really need that shirt in 3 colors? I think yes, but probably not. So it might be a mantra for some of you to keep in your head. So BOAB, bougie on a budget. This is what we're here for, right? So there are 3 steps that I encourage if you have never thought about a budget before. If this is day 1, or maybe this is day 3, you know that you want to do this, you started writing stuff down, but you're not quite sure how to really do it effectively, this is a good place to start. First thing, just talked about it. I need you to figure out what are your needs. And I say pay off what you owe and what you know. So you owe, right, at a certain point, whether you have scholarships, loans, paying on your own, you owe tuition. You owe rent or that, housing bill or whatever it is. And I also say pay off what you know, right? Part of being financially well is predicting what's coming up next. So if you know, for example, I tell this to all my students, that your lease goes through August, you might not be getting financial aid for summer. So when you get that, check, or when you're budgeting, think about covering May, June, July. If you build that in now, you can break it up weekly or however you budget, and we'll talk about that. That feels a lot less heavy than thinking about 3 months of rent at one time, right? Do you know that you have a car payment coming up? Do you know that you're planning on studying abroad in the summer and that deposit's going to be due soon? What are those things that you can automatically build in? Some other examples that I have seen be really effective for some people are, do you know that you are big on birthdays? And so you want to make sure that if you have a family member's birthday, you can build in some money to cover a gift for them, right? Or I know people who, this might be for some of the older folks in the room or non-students, you have weddings to go to. Are you building in money to travel to those weddings or, buy gifts? Or for me, I'm always a bridesmaid to buy those things, right? What are things that you can anticipate and build in? Because the way that we'll talk about this is breaking it up sort of monthly or weekly. Those big ticket items, when broken up smaller and smaller, feel a whole lot more manageable than putting something down. And I tell you this from experience because I studied abroad in Sydney, Australia when I was a student, and I did not budget properly. And all of a sudden I had to drop $2,000 on my flight. And that wasn't something I could break up. That was buy your flight now. And that hurt. And I wish that I listened when someone said you should put aside some money right now, because it was rough. It was very, very rough. So heed my warning there. This is something that some people might not be ready for, and that's okay. I always encourage you to put money in savings before you determine your weekly budget. And the reason I say that is because if you start putting your money into different pockets, you might sort of maybe be a little more lenient in some categories, right? How much do I need for eating out for the week? How much do I need for getting my nails done? Then you get to the end, you're like, I don't have any money to save. But if you work backwards, put some money in savings, however much you determine, maybe it's $100 for the semester, $20 a week, whatever that looks like, then you can sort of adjust appropriately. And it happens to me all the time with students where they're like, okay, I put too much in savings. I have no money for groceries. Okay, right, we need to adjust. But then you already know, okay, there's something in my savings account, and then I can reverse sort of engineer. And I have a budget example, I promise. A lot of this will come to life when we actually do it. But if you start putting money away now, it's going to leave you with a really solid, what we call nest egg. I say post-grad for those of you who are students. For our staff, friends in the room, or faculty, just always good to have. So if you put aside just a little bit, even if, once a week you look at that Starbucks or you look at that, for me, my weakness is Dragonfly Sushi downtown, and you say, okay, this $5, this $10, this $20, I'm going to decide to put in my savings. If you do that once a week, it's $80 a month. I can't do math, but if I did $80 a month times what? The whole year, that's almost $1,000 by making small choices, right? Putting some of that stuff away, by really just making more intentional choices, or by putting a sort of lump sum, if you know, at the beginning. And then the last thing is a weekly budget. I'll talk about it weekly. You can do it any way you want, but you have to count everything. You have to count every penny you're spending. And it doesn't have to be, I budget $10 for carrots. I did have a student do that one time. I was like, okay, we don't need to go that specific unless it really works for you. But really count, because what happens is, that $1 soda every day, it adds up. Those little tiny things will start to build, and then you'll suddenly be like, where's my budget? So those 3 steps in mind, how do we actually put some of this into play? So we're going to talk about that. But I want to just talk about 2 more things. Sorry, I forgot I had this slide. I need you to budget, and then I need you to believe what you're doing, and I need you to, again, hold yourself to a little bit of accountability and know yourself and be honest with your budget, because I used to be the person who would lie to myself about budgeting. I would sort of move money and hide money and do all this stuff. And then I just realized all I'm doing is hurting myself if I'm not being honest with myself. If you know that one of the things that's really important to you is, for me, for a long time in college, every Sunday I would go to mi papá, because my family is Cuban, and I wanted croquetas, and I wanted a pastelito, and I wanted my café. That was eating out. But I knew that for me, being very homesick, that made me feel a little bit better. I knew myself enough that was going to be in the budget, right? I can budget $15 a week for something that really does help. I don't want you to withhold from some of these things. It, again, really comes down to knowing what you want and what you need. So just be honest with yourself about what you're spending and build it in. If, again, you really like to get your nails done, or, once a week or once a month, you want a massage, build it into your budget, because then we've accounted for it. So when you do go to start spending money or whatever it is, you have already thought of it. You've already covered your bases. And then the second part of this is to make your savings work for you. This is again very step 1. So some people would tell you to get a Roth IRA, and that's sort of level 2 or 3. I'm not there just yet for some of you, but level 1, I would encourage you to find a high interest savings account. Most banks have them. Discover, Chase, Wells Fargo, right here on campus, and they won't have it's not a significant return on what you're putting in, but if it's got 0.5 or 1%, that money's just coming back to you. And what I would definitely encourage you to do is to have one of those accounts sort of separate. Mine is in an account that actually doesn't have a card, so I literally can't spend it unless I need to transfer money for an emergency. So that, again, it's accruing interest. I'm not really noticing it, and suddenly I blink and I've got more money than I thought because I sort of already put it away. So with those tips in mind, I have created for you all a budget spreadsheet. So if you go to bit.ly backslash Bougie 101, it is case sensitive, so that all those letters should be underlined or lowercase. There is an Excel spreadsheet for both. I created it for students, so staff and faculty, if you ever want an example, I can definitely create one. And there's an on-campus and an off-campus version. And I'll show you that in just a second, but this is for you to use. It is only able to be accessed if you are a UFL student or you have a UFL email address. So when you click on it, if you're logged into Google Drive on your own personal account, you're going to have to switch it over, and you can't edit it. You have to copy it over and make your own copy so that we don't all have everyone working in the same Excel file, because that would be really confusing. But when we start thinking about this, and I'm going to pull it up in a second, think about what works for you. For students, I find that working per semester is really helpful, and then breaking it down by month is really good, because for many of you, that's how you're getting your financial aid, right? You're going to get this lump sum and pay tuition. We're going to have enough for housing or whatever it is. But if you're also working and you're getting paid biweekly, it might be better to do a monthly budget. So the one that I'm going to show you is flexible. You can edit a lot of things. And then again, just a reminder, the steps are: make sure you got those bills and other payments covered, start a savings account, and then let's see what's left. So I'll show you over here what the actual budget looks like if you're not able to pull it up right now. And again, this is available to all of you to see. I see lots of you on it. That makes me so excited. So you'll see that I can edit it because I own it. But there's an on-campus and then an off-campus version of this. So it builds in the U.S. cost of attendance. I find that that's really helpful for some of you who are using financial aid. This is, how much, if you were to, get a full financial aid package and fill in with loans or have bright futures or whatever it is, if you were to hit the full cost of attendance here at UF as per financial aid, it's going to be $21,430 for an in-state student. I didn't want to go too complicated and do out-of-state and all that, but these are adjustable numbers. And down here, if you look at the sfa.ufl.edu /cost/undergraduate, it's going to give you a really awesome list of what the cost of attendance is. And my favorite thing, this is just a side, it's not really, what we're talking about, but I think it's really cool. You can actually hover and see what is included. So when you say transportation is one of the categories, it tells you what that includes. And I just think that's really, really fascinating and a great tool. So for me, the way my brain works, if you're an on-campus student, and I won't go into every single piece of this, is, okay, you took 15 credits of tuition. I owe UF, and O is a term that we'll use here, $31.90 for tuition, right? Okay, that's how much that I need to pay for tuition, though, you might have scholarships that'll pay for that for you. Let's say you're living at Beatty. That's, $2,845 for the semester. You have that open access meal plan at $2,100, and then your books are about $525. Okay. So what I did was then say, okay, well, we allotted you $31.90 for tuition. Perfect. You're right on par. Oh, we actually allotted you maybe a little more for housing. Cool. There's like a difference of $150. Oh, but it looks like you spent a little more on books. So that's just stuff you have to budget for, right? And again, this is all based on the cost of attendance, which is not accurate for everyone. So I encourage you to go in here and figure out what your numbers are. If I could individually create a budget for all of you, I would, trying to make this as sort of user-friendly as possible. So then, okay, let's think about our bills. You might pay for Disney Plus if you're like me and you watch Hamilton at least once a week. That is a fact. You've got car insurance. Okay, that's how much per month. If I'm going to budget for the whole semester, this is all conditionally formatted. You enter those, numbers, and it's going to do all the math for you. And then you want to study abroad, and you want to put aside a little bit of money for a rainy day fund, right? That emergency thing. Cool. We know that that's going to cost $700. Okay, looks like I need to budget the rest of my money for my weekly thing. So you have a meal plan. You don't need groceries. Starbucks. Okay, gas to drive around town. I go to, weekly dinner with my roommates from my residence hall, and then I pick up random groceries, and, it's $50 a month just to pick up, Oreos or something. Nikayla, that is truly just a number that I made up. So it is probably not entirely accurate. I work with my parents for insurance, and so I pay $100 a month. It might be a lot higher. I'm not an insurance expert, so I won't speak too much on that, but that is just truly most of these that are not the cost of attendance numbers are made up. So that's why it's so helpful to enter your own stuff. And just to show you, if yours is, 200, we enter that here, it changes to, okay, now we know it's 1,200 for that time, and it adjusts everything. So when you see that I edited that, it actually said, oh, I'm actually in the negative. I owe some money, right? So we need to adjust our budget somewhere else. So just, one thing to know. And then it's all accrued here. Okay, my UF bills, my regular bills, my savings, my spending. And this tells you, okay, at the end of the day, I have $35 unaccounted for. I have 35 extra dollars that I can build into my budget. If that number goes red, we need to adjust some numbers. I'm trying not to go, again, too detailed on this, but I do think it's helpful to talk through, what are some steps to really take. And the off-campus one is very similar, but a little different, right? We owe UF a lot less money if we live off campus because we pay rent on our own. So it does some of the same thing. Rent is here. You'll see for this one, for example, I covered January rent because for many of you, if you're living off campus, that January 1 rent comes, but that financial aid refund has not come yet. So budget that in a little bit. And then, this person, truly just making stuff up, they are planning on maybe having someone else cover their summer rent. They're going to do a sublease, but they still want to have that money built in. It does the same thing, right? Based on all of it, it adds up. Here's a number at the end. I don't want to go any more into detail on all of that because it is a lot. And I know that this might not be helpful to some, but I do find it's helpful to some people to just sort of explain my thought process. You might find that was truly terrible to sit through and that you don't like the way my budgeting works, and that's okay. I totally support that, and I totally support the idea that this is not the best budgeting for you. I am not an expert in everything, but hopefully by at least following some of those steps, again, bills, savings, budgeting what's left, you'll be able to sort of build in what's going to work for you. I highly encourage you to download those and then save them in whatever way. Maybe it's Excel, maybe it's on your own Google Drive, and just play around with it. Just play around, see what fits. The other activity I would encourage you to do is to really sit down and think about how much am I spending in a week? Just write out everything you spend, because you might find it starts adding up in some other ways that you might not have known about. The other thing I want to talk about is COVID, right? So we can talk all day about financial wellness and we can talk all day about budgeting. However, we are in some really uncertain times, and we have been. So for many of you, you might be supporting family. You might have taken that job to pay rent because, your family can no longer contribute, or, maybe you just know that your costs are a little higher for whatever reason. There's 100 different things. So a couple of things that I have found are really small ways to impact your budgeting and your finances, especially in light of COVID and really in light of any emergency. Number one would be to reduce your nice to haves. What are those small things that are really nice, but really do add up? And so, I did an audit recently of my own spending, and Hulu, Netflix, HBO, Disney Plus, I have like 5, and that's a lot of money, upwards of $60, $70 a month. I probably don't need all of those at all, right? Those are a lot of things for me to have money for that I could put other places. The other example I always give is, this is sort of nerdy, but I really like to have fresh flowers in my home. I cut that during COVID. That was not happening because it might be small, but if I'm doing that every week, even though they're $4 at Publix, that is something, right? It does, help to really look at, okay, what am I doing and what are some things I can cut back, at least for now, right? Reduce that spending to then in the future be able to sort of pick it back up. And then same thing, revisit that essential spending, revisit your grocery bills, and, what are other ways that you can cut back? I really learned to love Aldi during the main quarantine here in Florida because the produce was cheaper. So you might find that, those other products that you really love to have, those, for me, it's always, I like to have stocked Oreos. A lot of times I'd be like, oh, that's not really that helpful to me right now. So what are those essential things that may not exactly be essential, while keeping in mind that I still need you to eat? So, this is a great opportunity, again, if you're, struggling to also use the Field and Fork pantry. And right, it might not cover all of your groceries, but if you have budgeted money for your groceries, but you can get a lot of that at the pantry, that frees up money for other things. It gives you a little more financial freedom to do the things that you want to do. But the biggest thing that I'd really like to talk about is giving yourself grace and being okay with the fact that this is not always going to be a 100% process. There's going to be a month when your friends want to go out to dinner a couple times, and okay, cool. Don't beat yourself up if you do that. Or maybe it's, you just needed that extra Starbucks, right? That exam was, studying for that exam was a little harder. It's okay. Or, you bought something that you didn't realize how expensive it was. There's 100, again, different things that I could tell you about, but be kind to yourself. This is really, really, really stuff that is hard to break. Again, I'm very open about my financial journey and the fact that I really struggled to form positive relationships with money because I had always been so stressed about it. And then I didn't spend any money for a long time because I was like, I need to hold it all, right? And that's not a great way to do this. You need to be able to be okay spending money, and you deserve to have nice things. Where is the balance? You need to determine that. But I don't want you to beat yourself up if you spend money on something, because it's going to happen. And if you build it in and you expect it, then we knew it was happening, and then we're okay with it. So before I sort of end this, I always like to leave a good amount of time to answer questions about the actual spreadsheet, as well as answer any big questions. I have included my email if anyone ever wants to talk more about this. Happy to chat more about budgeting. If you have questions about your financial aid package, that will not be for me. That will be for student financial aid and scholarships. So I will definitely encourage you to reach out to them. My family, my parents were really good with Dave Ramsey, which is very like, let's focus on saving, like let's get done what we can. That's not perfect for everybody. I'm trying to think there. I'm going to look behind me on my bookshelf because there was a great book. I think it's like the Quick Millionaire or something to that effect. It's a really good book about, I got it from my brother one year, that helps just like how do you like compound things and how do you start small to really build up. But I also follow a lot of Instagrammers about budgeting. I'm a millennial, and so for me, really hearing from people my own age talk about budgeting is really helpful. For some of you, it might be on TikTok, which is, you'd be surprised how much learning can happen on TikTok. But to really just sort of see like what are the small things that I can do now to really sort of develop a good, healthy relationship with money. But I would also encourage you to look at some apps. So Mint is a really good one. Mint is an app that sort of consolidates all of your spending into little buckets. And what I mean by that is that it tells you spent $300 on, eating out, or you spent $100 on Starbucks, or it sort of puts it into pockets so you can really understand where you're going with your money and how much you're spending, but it also is really good at helping you save. So it'll say, you have a goal of saving $1,000 in 2 years. You need to do this much per week, like budget that in. So it is, I think, a lot of trial and error with some of this stuff, but these are some clearly great books that are being suggested in the chat. I love the idea of a weekly spending journal. Breaking down my pay period, definitely helpful. Good stuff, y'all. Thank you for sharing all of that.
For me, when I compare things, like when I would sit down and say, okay, I'm getting paying $5 a day for Starbucks, and then kind of compare it and say, well, that's this, X number of dollars. If I cut it down to this much, then I could pay off such and such, or pay this much off of such and such after a year. And it just kind of helps the comparison thing to me.
Oh yeah, that's such a good thing. Because when you do, you add it up and then you go, oh, like think about what is that big thing you want, right? And I used to do that in undergrad. If I wanted, I'm trying to think of, I really wanted these Ray-Bans. That's like the most relevant or, salient example for me. And they were pretty expensive. And I told myself, every time I went to go spend something, I was like, okay, that's $5. Like and then I just sort of put that money, I'd like squirrel it away, and then I could buy them no problem. But auto pay is definitely, for those of you who this is like level 1 for you right now, which is so good. Thanks for being here. Auto pay will change the game. I actually have 3 bank accounts, and I have auto pay, and I split it all up. So what comes into my checking account that I swipe is all the money I have for food, etc. But I know that like my bills are in another account and they're paid for, and my savings is in another one. So there have been times, I'll be honest, where I'm like at $20, and it's like, well, if I spend that $20, I'm sort of, I need to wait for my next paycheck, but I know that my rent is paid. And that would be something I definitely think about for impulse buying. And the other thing that I did in undergrad is, again, I think I mentioned earlier, I used to lie to myself about money. So when I would go grocery shopping, I would take out cash for however much I had determined I was spending for the week. And anytime I would break a 20, if I ended up with a $1 or a $5 bill, that went into a little jar, because those are bills you typically will spend frivolously. Slide that across the counter for Starbucks or for whatever it is. Can you tell I love Starbucks? That's all I've talked about. And then at the end of the term, I took all that money and I said, this is what will pay for my food when I'm studying abroad. And it was close to $500 from one semester of just ones and fives, which was very funny to take to Publix and then go, can you give me real, bills for this? But that was something that helped for me, was just really like putting it away and saying, okay, that's off to the side. And then I think that's also, Jennifer, what a great one. Think about it for a week. If you still want it, then you can go back for it. But
Another thing, the worst thing I've seen people do is hide their head in the sand and throw things into a drawer or whatever, or try to ignore it. And usually if they go ahead and they face it and look at it, it's not as bad as they thought it was. But in the meantime, you're miserable and you don't sleep, and you're just constantly, it's weighing on you because you're trying not to look at it. And the other thing on top of that is, sometimes if you call people, the debtors that you owe money to, maybe they'll work with you. But if you keep ignoring it and not paying them, they're not going to work with you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. What a good piece. It doesn't, not looking at something doesn't make it go away. And I will say, one of my favorite things, and the reason I leave so much time at the end, is because you all actually have such good nuggets of wisdom, because we all have different minds and work differently with this. And so I love to leave time for people to add different things, because my style is not the only style. It's so good to hear some of these other tips and tricks and what you all have learned. So definitely, though, don't, putting it in a drawer doesn't do anything. It just makes it harder. But definitely, find the people that you can talk to about this stuff, because you'll be surprised at who can help and who has, tips, and who has experienced, X, Y, or Z to be able to give you that little bit of advice. And the other thing I don't talk about in this, because I'm not an expert in it, but I do think it's something to keep in mind, is where credit falls in all of this, and credit cards. I have a really bad relationship with credit cards. I don't use them because I have low impulse control, like we talked about. And so I it's very scary for me to have them, because I just like to do this, and then I look and it's not great. So that's also something to think about, is those are really great ways for you to earn money. If you've got a credit card that's got a good, incentive for whatever reason, but you've got to be able to use it pretty well. So just another thing to throw into the mix.
There are credit cards out there that they're called secured credit cards, where you deposit a set amount of funds in the card, and that's basically what you're able to use. So if impulse buying is a weakness for you, that might be something to consider. And at the same time, you're also building credit.
There's also, I guess you call it a blog, I don't know, called The Penny Hoarder, and it has some really great ideas, and it's different things, divided over different ones, I guess. But some of them are ways to make a little extra money. And like last week, I think there was one on digitalizing photos, so you could kind of do an at-home business out of it. And I mean, they've always got these great ideas, or tell you about online jobs, or just things that people do as side hustles and stuff like that.
This is so good. I feel like I just learned some stuff too. So I love this. Y'all are fantastic. If there's anything else in the chat, or anything else you want to talk about, we can definitely do that. Sounds like I need to create a post-grad budget for some of you, which I'm like happy to do. This is like a very fun side project for me. But seriously, I'll drop my email in the chat. If you have any questions and you just want to chat about, how I can support you or how budgeting can be part of your life, please let me know. But again, if you have those financial aid questions, you know who to talk to, because they're hosting this workshop. Yep, there it goes. Perfect. But I guess I'll hang out for a little bit if anyone wants anything. But you're welcome to head out, and this is recorded, so you can always access it a little later.